In the midst of the holiday season, we found ourselves once again inundated with manufactured emotion, saccharine sentimentality, and consumerist excess. And yet, we must not be lulled into forgetting that the true story of Christmas is a story steeped in unspeakable violence. With the Magi's visit, King Herod is suddenly confronted with the illegitimacy of his position as Rome's imperial puppet in Jerusalem, and he lashes out in a genocidal rage worthy of Pharaoh himself. In this act, he epitomizes, embodies evil and imperial violence. The contemporary parallels would be uncanny if they weren't so horrifying. According to the numbers of Gaza's Ministry of Health, about 45,000 Palestinians have been killed and over 100,000 wounded, the vast majority being women and children, and by far the overwhelming majority being civilian. The genocide has resulted in acute human-made famine, resulting in the death of many, again, mostly children. The death toll amounts to roughly 2% of Gaza's pre-genocide population of about 2.3 million. However, these numbers only include verified kills. They do not account for the thousands thought to be buried under the rubble. Academic projections, including a study in The Lancet, posit hundreds of thousands of total dead. And according to reports, over 1,400 Palestinian families have been completely erased from the civil registry. And the genocide has resulted in the forceful displacement of nearly 2 million people from all over the Gaza Strip. Ultimately, Gaza is the deadliest place on earth to be a child, making up nearly half of the pre-war population. Approximately 18,000 children have been killed in Gaza, according to the Ministry of Health. Meanwhile, 3,500 children are at risk of death due to malnutrition. Nearly 13,000 are wounded and need to travel for treatment abroad, and yet are unable to. And 12,500 cancer patients face death due to the lack of treatment. Think, too, of the psycho-emotional impact. According to a recent study, 96% of children surveyed in Gaza believe that their death is imminent, while 49% have expressed a desire to die. The survey found that 92% of children were not accepting of reality, 79% suffered from nightmares, and 73% displayed symptoms of aggression. Other psychological responses include fear, anxiety, social withdrawal, and difficulty concentrating. Finally, an estimated 17,000 children in Gaza are unaccompanied, separated from their parents or caregivers due to the conflict, and they find themselves without protection from humanity's worst. And so the Herods of our time and their imperial patrons must never be allowed to silence the cries of the innocent. We must continue to hear their cry, refusing to be comforted by the lies and enticements of our privilege. We must amplify their plea, ensuring that the powerful be forever haunted by the cries of their victims. I recall the words of Jesus in Mark chapter 9, verse 42. As for whoever causes these little ones who believe in me to trip and to fall into sin, which I have long seen as a euphemism for child abuse, it would be better for them to have a huge stone hung around their necks and to be thrown into the lake. Oftentimes, we are asked to extend grace. This is not one of those times. For anything that prevents a child from experiencing the full fruits of God's kingdom, be it the trauma of poverty, of exploitation, abuse, war, of course, genocide, rightly results in God's divine wrath. As embodied in the bigoted cruelty of Pharaoh, the infanticidal cult of Moloch, and in the paranoid reign of King Herod, the biblical manifestations of tyrannical, idolatrous evil are those responsible for the slaughter and sacrifice of innocent children. Meanwhile, we are reminded time and again in Scripture that God's blessing, his continued care, and ultimate plan have always gone hand in hand with the continued presence and promise of children. For it is not the popes, apostles, patriarchs, or presidents, but the children who represent the sign of God's ongoing presence in our midst. I think it's fair to say that the status of children in our society, in our respective societies, is emblematic of the status that we attribute God himself. To honor a child is to honor the very presence of God in that child. And so if honoring a child is to honor the presence of God in that child, then to harm a child is to deface the very image of God. Ultimately, as the Magi read the words of the prophets, they found hope, seeing in them the promise of new life, of deliverance, and of liberation. Herod, meanwhile, instrumentalizes those very same prophecies to enact unimaginable terror in an attempt to prolong his idolatrous reign. Again, I can't help but notice the contemporary parallels. As the court prophets of Christian Zionism continue to subvert the promises of Christ's reign, as they provide ideological cover for imperial violence and settler colonial conquest. We must hear the cry of the holy innocents and cut through the noise of the imperial propagandists and the genocide apologists who work hard to silence or even try to justify the screams of the children. But like the mothers of Bethlehem, we must refuse to be comforted in the face of genocidal evil. Thank you.